Alright, finally back with another lizard landscape. Now what I've got here is more of a tabletop waterfall. So it's a taller waterfall, built essentially the same. It's got a different water pump. So with this one, there's not a water filter. So if you're wanting to use some of these techniques and you're building this for like a Chinese water dragon, you'd still want to, incorporate a water pump that has a filtration system. Makes your life easier. It's a lot, more sanitary for your critter that might be living in here. But this is really more for a decorative piece, a tabletop waterfall. So a lot bigger project than I'm used to making, so it took quite a while. I've got 2 ponds there. It's actually got 3 falls. The main taller fall, and then it goes into that first pond, down into another pond, and then down into the glass bowl. See where I've got the cords? I'm able to plug in the water pump, plus there's a fogger in there, as you can see down towards the right. So there is the fogger that worked. The previous video I did showcased that fogging unit that can increase the look of your project. And that particular fogger, you can change the color, orange, blue, and red. Now here is the base of the waterfall without that second piece that I'll show later in the video, where you can see the water line going through a little opening through that top section and then flows down into those 2 ponds and then circles back. You want to make sure you wear one of these dust masks, help protect you from all the particles and whatnot. In this project, I'm using some hot wires from the hot wire foam factory. You want to make sure you've got adequate ventilation, so you can't see it. I didn't get a shot of it, but I've got the window open when I'm using the hot wire. So this is how the project started. Just got a glass bowl. I've got this water pump that's got a line that goes up a couple feet. And you'll see me doing quite a few techniques in this video. If all you remember is essentially you're just trying to wrap styrofoam around this. You're trying to camouflage the bowl and the water pump. Now for those of you who are creating this for a living creature, you want to incorporate a water pump that's got a filtration system. So this is the water filter that I've used in the last 3 waterfall videos. So if you were creating this for a living creature, you would still want to incorporate a water pump that has a filtration system. So for this, I would choose much more of like a rectangular reservoir if you're wanting to use something that you buy in the store. With a glass bowl or anything ceramic, it's going to be waterproof. So I'm going to create these pieces and put them all around this bowl. So the pieces are a little bit taller than the bowl because you want to create these gaps so that the structure will fit in the end. So I'm just going to go all around the bowl here, and to try to make it easier so that this would fit, again using that hot wire, I'm going to cut certain pieces at different angles so that it'll fit better when I'm gluing these sections together. Using Loctite's Power Grab. This is just a really good adhesive that works really well with foam. Now I do have a materials list. If you go to the facts page on my website, it'll detail all of the materials, all of the glues and the foam and where I get them. So I've got that all glued together. It's dried for a couple days. I'm going to turn it over because I want to create a piece for the top of it. So I'm going to trace all around this. Then I'm going to draw basically like a 1/2 inch beyond it, just to create a little bit extra space to that piece. So using the hot wire to cut that section out. And again, you want to create gaps so that any pieces, like this has the bowl, it's got the main waterfall, and it's got the back piece. They all have to fit together, and they're all going to grow a little bit, because whether or not you use foam coat or grout, the more layers you put on, the more each piece is going to grow in each direction. So the pieces have got to be able to still fit together at the end. What I've done here is just create a center opening to that top piece. So this is where the water, after it hits the second pond, is going to flow into the glass bowl. So through that opening. So I'm going to go ahead and glue that on. So that is how basic it's looking at this point. So here you can see where there's room, for the bowl to move around a little bit. So you really don't want it fitting perfectly. Here's a piece I really didn't get good video of, but I've gone around the underside, because that's upside down, and it's just another piece of styrofoam that's protruding downward, even though this is upside down, in attempts to hide more of the glass bowl. So I'm going to cut a little section for the cords and the tubing system to fit through. And I'm going to cut another section just so it's easier to be able to get those cords. I ended up adding, the fogger later, but you've got the cord that goes to the water pump, and then the tubing that will go up vertically like that. So obviously you could get longer tubing, but I just ended up using what came with the water pump. So knowing how long that tube was, I was able to determine, okay, I've got to make this, however many inches high, whether that was 30, I can't remember. So I'm creating pieces that will basically support a very tiny reservoir up top as the water flows down that first, down into that first pond. Sometimes I use these little nails to hold on to the pieces or keep them in place before I decide, okay, I'm going to now glue this into place. And with this, I was checking every now and then to make sure that everything was level. So using a level here to make sure, it's not dramatically off. Even if you were, you could compensate later by adjusting it. So creating a back piece here. This back piece will be the section that covers up or camouflages the cords and the tubing system. And creating more pieces that will, help it fit as if it is one piece. So you're also camouflaging the fact that you've got two pieces. So you want these two pieces to fit together so that, to someone walking by it, they would think it's just part of one piece. So there I've got the tubing. Constantly checking this to make sure, did I get the measurements right? Am I going to have enough room to get this tubing up and over and into that first little reservoir? And then gluing the top platform where the water will initially be held, I guess. You can see that little section right there, that's where the tube is going to come up and over. Increasing the top little reservoir that's going to hold that initial, I guess, flow of water. So the tube coming up and over, so I wanted it to be able to wedge in there and stay put. So I've got this little opening that's a little bit, it's not as tall because that's where the water's going to flow out. Now this is that circle piece that I cut out. So I'm going to cut out this little piece that makes it basically look a little bit more organic. So that's where the first and second pond are going to be from that initial drop. And then extended it on the right side there. So again, it looks, not so circular. Then I'm going to build up that first pond so that it's tall enough to be able to actually flow down into the second pond. And then drawing another little piece whereby it can have the water flow over that into the second one. So gluing this in place and then extending the second pond a little bit. And again with the level, making sure, and with the first pond I was off a little bit, so I ended up taking that off and kind of boosting that left side with a little bit more glue. And of course you really don't have to get this perfect as far as the level. I just got kind of into it, and of course you don't want to be too off with whether or not it's level. Taking the hot wire and creating a little bit more detail. I'll go through that a little bit later. And then just breaking off chunks of styrofoam to build up those two ponds. Breaking off chunks in the form of like rocks. And then putting little pieces in the actual pond just to give it a little bit more detail. Having some rocks taller than what I know the water line's going to be. Here I've got some really large pieces of styrofoam. I'm using EPS styrofoam, and it's insulation that you get at the hardware store. So you can see the thickness of the foam I usually use, and then you've got this much thicker foam. So I knew I was going to be dealing with a very big project, so I went ahead and got some really large sheets of styrofoam. So tracing around the base of the initial piece there, and I'm going to cut through this with the hot wire. So cutting that out, and then I cut out the center area that I traced around that circular piece. So this fits in. I ended up, if you see those black lines there, that I'm putting those in just to be able to tell where to put the piece back in. So with that magic marker, and then creating another piece to go on the other side of this. And of course building up that second piece that camouflages the cords in the tube. And what I'm going to do here is just apply glue on the inner part, because I know I'm going to take or potentially take the hot wire through the other parts, but I know I'm probably not going to go through the part that I'm putting glue on in that, I guess, closer to the edge, if that makes any sense. All right, now's the time for a very short intermission. I was supposed to get this project done in the month of December. Unfortunately, it wound up taking way longer than I thought, a big project. But because of the month of December, I was going to talk about the real meaning of Christmas. And then I thought the real meaning really should be for all year round. So for that point, it might actually be better that it's not for a specific time frame, just like the month of December. It's for all year round. I'm someone that was not raised with Christianity. For me, it was about 6 years ago that I started studying the words of Jesus Christ. Suffice it to say, my life has improved dramatically since then. Christianity essentially gives you a life you didn't know you wanted. You'll never regret studying the words of Jesus Christ. Jesus came into the world to provide us an example of how to live. And in the process, he took upon all of our wrongdoings so that we could one day join him in heaven. So that holiday we call Christmas is a celebration of God in human form coming into the world as the greatest act of love and forgiveness when he died on the cross for you and me. So start studying the words of Jesus Christ and watch how your life develops and improves for the better. Head on over to my Christian channel and check out those videos. Thanks for listening. Now back to the video. All right, we're back. Thanks for listening to that. Proceeding to apply more adhesive. And here's where you can really see where I've got the black marks. So I'll put a black mark on each piece to know where, the other piece lines up with it. So gluing that in place. And here are those just random sized rocks that ended up being what you see on the right there, with that ascending, I guess, staircase-like look of rocks that go up to the top. So taking the hot wire, or one of the hot wires, and basically trying to get rid of certain sections of the styrofoam, trying to carve out a more organic look. And this is something with a little bit, not even with practice, you can pretty much do this from the get-go in creating a nice jagged, realistic looking rock face with the hot wires. Now here I've got like a collection of rock, a little bit different from just taking the hot wire. Carved out these rocks separately and went around it with the marker just to tell where, they're going to be glued together. Glue those on, and they're a nice little system of rocks that you can then glue on to the main piece. So taking the hot wire here and going through it and trying to carve out a little bit more realistic rock look. Or you can take, here I've got just a single rock that I've carved out and then glued onto the main body. There's how that second piece is looking that camouflages the chords. So I'll go ahead and build that all the way up. So that you obviously don't want to glue. You want to be able to remove that to be able to get to the chords. So here I've got that top piece, and I want to have the tube that is the water line go through that opening. So building up the top of that, and that's where the tube will go. So that other piece that camouflages the chords in the tube, I'm going to build up around it like that with that tall of a piece. And basically go over, like up and over, just like that, and still maintain a gap because they will be two different pieces, and I want them to be able to still fit together after I apply foam coat. So here you can see the gap, a little bit, maybe a 1/4 inch play, where I know I'll be able to fit these two pieces back together. And there's those two pieces. You can see the gap where I'll still be able to safely fit them back together. Just creating some ridges for that first initial fall. You really want to be able to guide the water to avoid leaks. You want to essentially create some ridges so that even though it's slow moving water, you don't want to have it take a right or a left turn on you and create a leak. And I ended up doing quite a few tests to make sure that it wouldn't leak. Here I'm creating like a bush or a shrub or something. It looks more like coral. But taking the hot wire and poking some holes in there, trying to create a more organic looking bush. And just trying to create some texture for that section just looked a little too flat. So sometimes you can just use the glue, the adhesive, to create these bumps. Gluing on some rocks onto that top part of the second piece. And inevitably with every project I do, I wind up with these gaps where with pieces that are supposed to fit together and just be one cohesive piece, they'll end up being these gaps where you really need to fill these in either with pieces of thin styrofoam or, as I'm doing here, with more of the adhesive. In some of the smaller areas you can use the adhesive and be able to fill in those gaps, because the next stage is applying a layer to a foam coat. So this is another product from the Hot Wire Foam Factory, where they send you directions along with what you order. But I have used grout in the past, a lot of projects that are on the channel. I've used non-sanded grout, but using foam coat really is a much better product. It's a lot stronger. You won't get that brittle, weak feeling to the first layer that you do with grout. So what I'm doing here is just applying it to where the water is going to go, and then I'm going to test it, as you can see, just to make sure that there aren't any major structural problems. And I do this at least 2 or 3 times throughout this process to make sure, because you're putting an enormous amount of time into this, and you're wanting to know, okay, is this got some serious problems? Is this going to work? So what I ended up doing is putting in this ridge, and you can see there on the left there, putting a ridge like this in is going to, 1, make the waterfall really loud. 2, it's going to create some splashes. So you'd have to really be careful and decide what you want. If it's going to be outside, it'll be fine, but if it's really going to be on a tabletop, you might not want to put that ridge in there, because the water is having to go over it, and it'll, like I say, 1, be louder, and also create a lot of splashing. And what I did is I only put 1 layer of foam coat on here. It took so long to do, it was so big. But just that 1 layer was strong enough. But if you're creating this for like a Chinese water dragon, you would really need to put more than 1 layer on, just to create more strength. So here I've got another batch of foam coat that doesn't have as much water. So it's thicker, it's more like the consistency of clay, where you can go back in and create some more detail, adding to the ridges there on that first drop where the water comes out, just to make sure the water is going to go where I want it to go, instead of make a slight detour here and there and create an awful leak. Another thing you can do is really sharpen up the edges, really reestablish some of that detail that you end up losing whether or not you use foam coat or grout. And here I'm brushing away some of the sharp areas that can be created. There can be sharp areas and there can be weak areas. So after you've let the first layer dry for like 2 days. Usually I'll do that. So here's how it looks after one layer of foam coat has been applied. So it's ready for the painting stage. This is like a dollar store water bottle, and I've got acrylic black and white paint, a lot more white than black. And it's just a really quick way. This took maybe 5-10 minutes at the most to cover the entire thing in a light gray color. So I knew I wanted to cover it completely in like a light gray, and then from that point go on and add layers. So I'm going to try the dry brush technique. Usually you start with the dark and then go to a light color. Started with a light, and now doing a dry brush with a darker color. So this is a really dark gray that loaded the brush and then got rid of a lot of the paint on a paper towel, and just trying to create some texture to the rock face. So going over the entire project there. And then you can just use different techniques, just tapping, using a very light gray here, just to create, a lot of layers, using some brown paint. So and you can get into some different techniques with different types of brushes that can provide a really different look. And here, again with the layers, I knew I wanted a grassy, weeded area here, so I'm going to put some brown paint, and you can see on the right, that's what I ended up doing as a last stage. So I've got all those layers. You got a layer of dirt and then put some grass, but you're leaving some of the dark brown or dark green as you then put in like some of the lighter yellow. So I've got the brown going on to like another layer where I'm not covering up all that brown, using some of that green, putting in some like really dark, almost black splotches, and then finally going in with like a really light yellow. And maybe, there's a whole bunch of dandelions or flowers or something. So it's really all about the layers and creating this different look so it's not all one color. Another thing you can do is go in with like a really dark brown or black and create like the illusion of cracks in the rock. Then coloring the bushes in green. And then doing some green growth, putting in some moss. And decided to color the ponds in like a dark gray blue. And then put back in some of the light gray rock color in certain areas. And then that classic white foam look that we all kind of associate with waterfalls, putting some of that in, sort of create an illusion. And then in the pond itself, going around and again another illusion of like a water line. I knew where the water was going to come up to in each pond, so going around with some white and putting in some random moss here and there. So basically got this covered with a paint job. And what I'm going to do, even if you're not going to create this for a living creature, you really want to seal it because it protects it, make it last longer, it makes it stronger. What I'm using is a 100% acrylic sealer. It's called Shields-All. And I'll put 2 to 4 layers of this on here. And what this stuff is it's non-toxic, it's water resistant. So I don't think it's waterproof, but it's going to be able to handle your splashes and whatnot. And this is the consistency that it arrives in. It's able to work its way through a water bottle. So here I'm doing another test just to make sure, is the water going where it needs to go before I move on to the silicone stage. So everything's fine, there's no leaks. So here I'm outside because silicone is incredibly toxic. It's a lovely odor. So you definitely want to be outside when you do this. Out on my balcony. So, and what I'm going to do is just apply silicone. This is aquarium grade silicone. So toxic when wet, but when cured or dry, it is food safe. So, but the main thing is for this, because this is only a tabletop waterfall, is that it is 100% waterproof. So you really don't have any worries of, unless you've applied it incorrectly, you don't have any worries of it leaking at some point in the future. I'm just going to apply this to every area that's going to have water on it 24/7. So where the water flows down, obviously, and then the two ponds themselves, try to cover that. And so having that glass bowl, you don't have to then cover another piece or section with silicone. So this is going to live out there for a couple of days because I want to air it out and make sure it's nice and dry. So, and usually what happens with these projects is I'll at some point damage a certain part. So a quick way of doing that, whether it happens here or a year from now, putting some of that same acrylic sealant and then sprinkling some non-toxic fine grain sand on that section, and then you could always repeat the process to really build up that area. Another reason to use the fine grade sand is to counteract the shiny finish that the sealant will leave behind. So you, again, putting some of that sealant down and then sprinkling some of the sand on there will counteract some of that shiny finish. And then once that is dried, you want to brush that off, all that loose sand. We're going to go ahead and put this over top of the bowl. Going to go ahead and put the water line in through that little opening. And I created a little ridge or notch to force that tube to stay down. It was acting up. This, you really want to make sure that the opening for that tube is higher than the water line of that first reservoir, because otherwise obviously it'll go into that little hole. And putting the back cover on to camouflage the guts. And there you have it. This was a rather time-consuming waterfall, but you can always make a shorter waterfall, not so tall, not so big, less time-consuming, for your tabletop or your Chinese water dragon or pet toad. Thanks for watching.